Good afternoon. Before I begin, first of all, let me take this opportunity to thank the BIR and more importantly the Chairman, Stuart Whitley, for giving me this opportunity to deliver a presentation on the role of the consultant and also sort of determining the sort of the key priorities when looking at a construction project which relates to the imaging scheme. I hope I'm sort of just one piece of the jigsaw that's actually going to slot in place today with all the other sort of the delegate speakers as well. So, my name is Yogesh Luhar. I'm a Director of Health Sector Facilities Management Limited and also Day Architectural Limited. We're a practice based in the northwest of England, specialising in providing estate services to senior estates managers, specialising more in sort of strategic consultancy, estate planning and development, healthcare redesign, and also organisational development and management, but also now architectural services as well. When I was actually asked to give this presentation by Stuart, I found it a little bit difficult as to where to pitch the presentation because I'm certainly presenting to a well-informed client. So if I'm actually going over old ground, please forgive me, but I'd like to sort of start the presentation off now. I think the main sort of key areas I'd like to sort of talk about is meeting the challenges. I mean, the NHS is currently going through sort of quite turbulent times. Looking at IT and its sort of very broad impact on the design and the delivery of projects. Looking at the sort of the divergent needs of the imaging department and how that sort of fits into the key determinants in governing the success of a project. So if you look at the sort of the main challenges currently affecting the NHS, I think you'll agree that the financial deficit is probably the key one. Interestingly enough, we actually had a seminar which Health Sector Facilities Management sort of delivered last year, and it was attended by about 60 NHS trust managers. And majority of them actually believe that 50% of the sort of the 15 to 20 billion pound deficit cuts that have been identified will actually come through the estates department. So I think that's actually really sort of pressurising estates and facilities directorates to actually sort of drive down costs, which will naturally impact on the successful delivery of a scheme, and not only in sort of construction costs, not only in terms of professional fees, but also I think the equipment costs and also the maintenance costs as well. So clearly financial deficits is a key issue. We've also got sort of issues regarding hospital-acquired sort of infections, avoidable sort of injury and death, capacity constraints, which has already been touched upon this morning, public and political concerns about waiting lists, and lastly, technology, because technology is sort of moving at such a pace now that it's really very, very difficult to sort of keep up to date. And I'll just sort of come back on to the issue of technology in a few minutes. But meeting the sort of the challenges that we've actually got, I think they can primarily be delivered by looking at sort of three key areas: organisational productivity, organisational development, and also some process improvements as well. Looking at sort of organisational productivity, you've got the issue of management and administration sort of streamlining. I think people are sort of looking at sort of ways of streamlining sort of the departments, and I think the redundancies that are being announced at the moment is well sort of advertised. You've also got sort of issues of strategic audit of space utilisation, facilities management. We recently did a space utilisation survey for an NHS trust, and whereby health building notes and other guidances actually give you the amount of sort of space that's required to carry out an activity. What we actually looked at was the issue of space over time. And interestingly enough, what actually happened was that operating theatres, certainly ward areas, we found that efficiencies were running at about sort of 90%, whilst in some sort of satellite hospitals, they were running at about 16%. And the reason for that was that people were block booking areas, offices, and say for a two-hour block, they were actually only using 20 minutes of the, and people are sort of very, very territorial. So I think the way that they need to actually have a look at sort of space utilisation is actually quite critical. Benchmarking strategy and also performance operational reviews and compliance with assurance audits as well. You've also got issues in terms of advising back office development, IT equipment, and also sort of quality and productivity gains through lean and also sort of working through Six Sigma as well. Process improvements need to focus on value for money and also performance and payment mechanisms. I think the issue of sort of PFIs and PPPs, certainly PFIs is actually sort of quite a sort of an emotive subject with the government at the moment, I think, as everybody will probably realise. So I said to you that I was going to sort of touch on technology. How has sort of digital technology sort of affected us? But certainly digital technology is fueling the advance in imaging technology. We've primarily got sort of four main areas that we need to consider which will govern the design of sort of imaging areas. We've got sort of new technology, modes of equipment, speed and power, and evidence-based research. New technology certainly has meant that the fundamentals of design are actually having to be rethought of now. I think the need for actually having big centralised imaging departments is probably no longer the case now. With the sort of the sizes of equipment that I've actually got, I think you may actually sort of have satellite sort of areas because imaging departments are considered primarily as a support service for the other departments. So is it necessarily to actually have sort of large imaging departments? My colleagues may probably well disagree with me, but nevertheless, I think it's probably worthwhile noting. You've also got sort of modes of equipment as well. Modes of equipment, you've got different types of modes, smaller units. So clearly the pace at which technology is changing now, we really need to build in flexibility into the spaces that we're actually looking at. So I think that's actually very, very critical. Speed and power, I think the more speed that we've actually got, I think the more sort of patient flow through we've got, I think chances now that we can actually do a full body scan now within the time it actually brings a patient into the actual sort of imaging department. So clearly, I think there are issues there that also need to be considered. Look at ways of actually introducing sort of staging areas, waiting areas. I think fellow colleague also touched upon sort of looking at the size of sort of waiting areas as well. And also evidence-based research as well. I think it's highlighting now that good design will certainly benefit and also have a direct effect on the outcome of staff performance and efficiency as well. So what are the sort of the main different needs that we need to be looking at in terms of sort of imaging departments? Clearly, we've got the issue of accommodation. We've got very quite large, heavy equipment, bed equipment requiring extensive infrastructure and also sort of shielding requirements as well. We've got to create a safe, pleasant and an efficient working environment and also a comforting environment for the patients as well. A lot of sort of the experience that patients will probably have is relatively new. I think they're not accustomed to sort of being sent in through a sort of an imaging equipment. So it's quite a daunting thing for them. So we need to sort of ensure that we're actually providing them with an environment that's actually comforting. We've also then got to look at rearranging the sort of the whole puzzle and looking at sort of technology as a whole. That digital imaging involves the movement of data and not people. So what we've got to do is that we need to look at the schemes in that sort of light. Designs are now sort of based on workflow and patient satisfaction. A full understanding of the technology design implementation is critical to the actual development of the design process. And although there are sort of great advances in imaging equipment and healthcare construction, I think there are key number of rules that actually remain the same, that architect or project management may be forgiving, but technology isn't. So certainly we've got to ensure that the accommodation we're providing is a support to the main purpose that we're actually there is to provide accommodation for the equipment. So but that leads us on to the sort of main key determinants that we need to be looking at. Certainly gathering the team, or a team that actually has adequate knowledge in terms of imaging scheme, is critical to the scheme. Often the client will actually sort of govern as to the way that the actual contract is going to be procured. But we need to ensure that the right design team is actually sort of appointed as well. And invariably, I think what you'll probably find is that in a design team and a project, we'll probably have a project manager, architect, structural engineer who will be responsible for looking at the structural implications of sites, and also services engineering. What we've got to understand about building projects is that they're effectively temporary workplaces. They're not an industrial process whereby we're sort of manufacturing widgets. Every time we actually go and do a building project, it is a temporary workplace. So all the issues that we need to be considering have to be reconsidered over again in light of the specific circumstances that we actually have relating to that site. So I think having the right design team who've probably been through or certainly have experience of these sort of things, I think is actually vital and also paramount as well. And also understanding what the equipment sort of issues are. I'm sure my colleagues will probably agree that understanding exactly what equipment is actually going to go in terms of the sort of loading structures, in terms of the services requirements, is absolutely paramount as well. And also that may have been sort of incorporated within the actual business case. We've got to understand the definition of the roles and the responsibilities. We've got to understand who's going to be making the key decisions, certainly from the client side, that somebody who has the delegated powers, who's actually going to be signing off the schemes, which reflect the needs of the department. And that, I think, is absolutely critical. Signing off of the certain schemes, you will probably find that a lot of the schemes will probably follow the sort of capital investment value process, whereby the certain stages are actually signed off at different sort of design stages. So we need to actually have the client who's got the authority to actually sign off key stages. Somebody who actually understands how to read drawings, that is, I think, another critical thing, because actually looking at a two-dimension sheet, understand it in a 3D concept, I think sometimes it's actually quite daunting. Certainly we have now the technology available whereby we're actually sort of putting it into a 3D model so you can actually do a walk around, which actually also helps as well. But nevertheless, I think it's still important that somebody is there who actually sort of understands how to read drawings. And also making sure that the delineation of the responsibilities are actually incorporated as well. We've had instances with a number of the projects that we've looked at whereby we have the Trust Estates Department are actually wanting us to sort of improve on the services that actually are the incoming services into the department. So there is actually no definition, line drawn as to how far we need to actually improve the services by. And naturally, that's actually going to sort of add on to the cost. So clearly, I think delineation of responsibilities is actually sort of quite important. But also establishment of the brief as well. I think that's probably taken into account within the actual sort of the business case. But clearly and succinctly highlighting and outlining the time, the cost, and the quality issues that are absolutely going to be vital in a building project. What we'll find that I think time spent in actually establishing the brief will probably pay dividends, right, when the actual job has started, because we certainly hope that variations are going to be minimized, because trying to issue variations once the job has started is probably going to be a lot more expensive than if the items were considered at the outset. We've got other sort of key issues as well. We need to look at the effective planning of the cost assumptions. We've got sort of infrastructure costs. Invariably, that you'll find that some of these schemes may be within existing hospitals, certainly within the middle of hospitals, where you've got to look at all the other factors that actually affect the success of that project. You need to be looking at the structural implication, the services implications, access routes. If the area certainly needs protecting whilst we're actually bringing the equipment in, may well be. You'll never invariably find that a lot of the hospital developments are actually quite dense. Craning in of the equipment, double handling of material is all going to add to costs which need to sort of be taken into account right at the outset. So consequently, I think having the right team who will actually highlight these issues, I think is actually very, very important. You need to look at sort of the implications of health and safety, noise, dust. We had an instance whereby we had a contract that started. The builder had finished the project and he felt that he was a builder's clean. But then we had to sort of stop him in his tracks and sort of say to him, look, we've probably got about £250,000 of sort of high quality equipment coming in. We can't actually have a builder's clean. The whole place needs to be dust free to enable the commissioning process for the imaging equipment to actually occur. So that was an issue that also sort of needed to be sort of taken into account as well. Need to be looking at sort of delivery times in terms of the equipment, and all those issues need to be incorporated within the programming and the planning side to ensure that the actual project is going to be sort of delivered within the sort of cost elements as well. I think the issue of risk assessments has already been touched upon as well. I'd like to sort of primarily concentrate on the risks associated with the construction project. It's vital to actually sort of sit down with the client, with the equipment suppliers, with the estate staff, the estates department, and actually identify and create a risk register whereby if there is a transfer of risk, then it is in fact highlighted at the outset so that everybody is fully aware of exactly where the actual risk lies if something were to actually happen. And then you've got the issue of sort of the contract in the way in which the contract is going to be procured. You've got various ways of actually looking at sort of delivering contracts. The Joint Contracts Tribunal, which we term as the JCT form of contract, gives you a variety of ways. You've probably got the named subcontractor, the nominated subcontractor, domestic subcontractor, and also a turnkey project as well. But now you also have the Procure 21. If I can probably just very briefly touch upon the sort of the differences between them. A domestic subcontractor is primarily somebody that is appointed by the main contractor to actually carry out work. We don't normally tend to find that equipment suppliers will probably go for those sort of contracts. You probably have a named subcontractor whereby the client is actually is being provided the price of the equipment supplier, and he would then like the main contractor to actually enter into a subcontract with the equipment supplier. You then have the nominated subcontractor, which the client has already entered into agreement with the client and the equipment supplier, and he would then like the main contractor to enter into agreement with them. And it gets actually quite complicated. Then you've actually got the turnkey, whereby you're sort of abrogating responsibility onto the equipment supplier, where they will actually sort of appoint their own design teams, appoint their own builders, and the whole responsibility of delivering that project completely lies with him. And yes, I think there are pros and cons with everything, but nevertheless, I think it needs to be looked at in light of the project that you've actually got in hand. And then finally, you have the Procure 21 Plus, as it's now termed, whereby a framework agreement has actually agreed with, I think nationally, with about sort of 11 contractors, and you will actually enter into a contract where they will actually deliver a turnkey project as well. So there are various ways, but I think if you need any further information, then I'm happy to provide them. Then you've got the issue of the communications, whereby the right communication line is absolutely paramount. You've got the aspirations, requirements of the department and the individuals in charge. We need to ensure that the department actually has highlighted all the information that needs to happen to the delegated person, so he can actually transfer that over to the design team and to ensure that all the actual communication line has actually occurred. You've got the requirements of the equipment supply and the adjoining departments. We've had instances whereby we've been working in hospitals and we've got adjacent areas, And buying a box of chocolates for the matron before the job starts works dividends, because you're sort of getting her on your side, and in terms of sort of just generally letting the contract flow and her being perhaps a little bit more tolerant when the actual building work starts, I think really, really does help. And flowers and chocolates, I think normally I sort of tend to find that that's the way to go. We've also then got to ensure that health and safety files and also operating and maintenance manuals. The building industry was sort of actually presented with another role, which is now called a CDM coordinator. His primary role was to ensure that the aspects of health and safety were taken into account during the build stage, whereby the designers and the clients all sort of took on board any health and safety issues, and they were, as far as possible, designed out of the project. What then actually happened is that once the building has been built, we need to have the relevant health and safety information, identifying the risks that have been designed out or the risks that are still present within the project, and to ensure that those have been highlighted so that any future person coming in to actually maintain the building is fully aware of them, and he has sort of paid due attention to those particular risks. So those are really, I think, the main key determinants that I actually feel that need to be considered that will deliver a successful project. So just to sort of recap, I think the NHS is going through fundamental change. I think the issue of cost is going to be paramount. And I hope by identifying these sort of key determinants, it's going to make people realise that delivering a project is a highly complex area, and you need to have the right team on board with the right communication skills to ensure that this project is successfully delivered. Thank you very much indeed.